AI is already in the classroom. Students are using it, instructors are navigating it, and higher ed is trying to keep up. But what if the real question isn't whether we use AI, but how we design learning in a world where it exists? So today we're talking about what it really looks like to engage students in that reality with someone who's not just thinking about it, but actively experimenting in the classroom. Welcome to the Hawk's Edge, the official podcast of Hawk's Learning, where we explore insightful conversations on teaching, technology, and transformation in higher education. I'm your host, Valerie Ball, and in each episode, we bring you real voices, real challenges, and real innovation that's shaping the future of learning. Today, we have Associate Teaching Professor of Economics at Rowan University, Dr. Jesse Melvin. Dr. Melvin teaches courses in microeconomic theory, public policy, statistics, econometrics, I think I said that correctly, and research methods. His work and interests really focus on leveraging technology like AI to enhance student engagement, foster that deeper learning, and support inclusive instructional practices. Wow. We are so lucky to have you here. So welcome, Dr. Melvin.
Thank you for
Before we dive in, what originally drew you to economics and teaching, and share anything else that you'd like to introduce yourself?
Of course. Well, as you know, it's pretty rare for little boys and girls to be want to be an economist when they grow up. But I did always see teaching as a wonderful profession. When I was in school, talking middle school, high school, I often found myself teaching my fellow students math or in science classes, things that I was passionate about and knowledgeable about. I really enjoyed teaching them, and that was not for a paycheck. So I definitely discovered my love of teaching very young. And then when I was in undergrad, originally I was going to be a chemistry major. I took one chemistry class, and then I explored from there and realized that I really liked learning what makes people and markets move. And so naturally that drew me to economics.
So yeah, it was ingrained from you from the beginning.
That's right.
Pretty awesome. Yeah. Okay, so was there a moment when you realized you wanted to innovate how students learn? You said teaching was really part of who you are. So how about thinking a step deeper?
Sure.
When did that happen?
That I would say I really noticed that during my undergrad in college, where I saw the teachers, everyone has their own teaching style, but the kind of just sitting in the classroom, feverishly writing down what the professor says, I just saw that as not the right mode of instruction. And so as I was going through my undergrad, I noticed certain professors had certain innovations that they would use in the classroom. And I remember thinking like, oh, you know what, like when I'm teaching, I want to use this method. And so just kind of an accumulation of seeing how different people teach. And then once I came on the scene as a teacher myself and started attending conferences and systematically learning what drives engagement, what drives deeper learning, and just kind of incorporating that. It was interesting designing my first class and kind of nerve-wracking because I wanted to try different attendance methods, different ways of using technology, and thankfully it worked out. And so now that I've recognized new ways to teach, I really like sharing that with other teachers.
Awesome. Well, that's why we're so glad to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Other teachers would say that student engagement, and not being in the higher ed space for quite some time, student engagement is almost always a challenge.
Yes.
And I think it's gone up and down, but it's always challenging. So right now, in terms of student engagement, what are you seeing?
I think the kids are all right. I'm noticing that obviously, kind of common knowledge that with COVID, things were kind of weird for a while, but I think they're back on their feet. I'm noticing, it's not wonderful engagement across the board. You're always going to have bored students. You're always going to have engaged students, but I have noticed that they're taking on projects with more vigor. I'm not noticing any attention issues in the classroom. And so I really have an optimistic view about where students are today.
Great. Well, that's a really good testament to you, getting them to show up. And so I'm excited to hear some examples. But there's like changes in the past 3 to 5 years, obviously COVID. But is there an example where you can think of where it's really been good or really been not so good?
Yeah. So I will say, with the advent of AI on the scene, one of the things that really gets students disengaged is whenever they're faced with a phenomenon that they're studying or a problem or working on a homework or something where when a student kind of gets stuck in the process and, if they were sitting next to the teacher or someone knowledgeable, they'd say, oh, I don't really understand how I work through part 2 of this problem. And because I can't do that, I can't do parts 3, 4, and 5. And so, it used to be maybe you would pay a tutor to help you, but you're going to be tackling the problem and then the tutor's days later and you have to revisit the problem. The nice thing about AI is, and I encourage my students to do this, like when they hit that point where they would get stuck and get frustrated, just ask ChatGPT, ask an AI program to push you along the way. Never ask it for a solution, but ask it to guide you to a solution. And surprisingly, especially in the last few years, LLMs, those large language models, are really good at using the Socratic method. And you can even ask it. I have my students ask it, like, request a Socratic method of teaching. Through questions, can you guide me to the correct answer? And so it used to be students would disengage at that stage because they're frustrated. And now, they've got a personal tutor for free available instantaneously. And so I've noticed that that's really helped drive engagement. On the other side, of course, you have students who may just be copy pasting straight out of AI, and that's not going to help with the learning process. So, but on the engagement side, I've only seen it as a plus.
That's great. So it's not that they're not engaged, they're just engaging differently.
Exactly. Yes. And I think every generation can make that claim.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Awesome. So how do you measure real engagement in your courses? You're telling your students to kind of go and ask to get them to that next level, but how do you know that they're engaged? Do you have a way of assessing that?
For sure. So I teach in person, which you can actually just get visual cues if they're looking up at you, engaged. But a lot of times you can measure engagement through in-class discussions. So if you ask a student, one of the concepts I teach is a public good, which has very specific definitions. And in economics, a public good is not what you would kind of intuitively think of as a public good. So when I ask for an example of public goods and I see half the students kind of go like, do that look up, maybe hand on the chin, like, I know they're engaged. You can see their brain, running and racing and trying to think of how they can connect their real life experiences to this theoretical concept we're covering in class. And so that's a really good way to measure engagement. And then I also just ask my student during lectures, sometimes I'll ask them, I'm like, raise your hand if you're bored. And my students will be honest with me. And I know that, if a lot of them raise their hand when I ask that, I need to change the pace, maybe include some sort of photo narrative. There are ways you can increase engagement. And so I just directly ask my students. And since I try to foster an environment of honesty, I really do trust that feedback.
Absolutely. So so just want to ask, you have done some kind of gamification
That's right.
in your courses. And can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So I love games, and I think, most people do. And
Mm-hmm.
so kind of tying into what we're talking about with engagement, classes, the more boring a class is, the harder it is to learn. And this is something we all intuitively understand, but it's also something that's been studied in the literature. They call it novelty-induced dopamine. When you give a student a fresh new game, something for them to wrestle with and to solve and to collaborate with other people, they're just going to be like physically excited by this and mentally engaged in it. And so I knew that I wanted to use game-based learning, and I had an amazing high school. I'm going to shout her out on this podcast, Mrs. Doyle. She used game-based learning to teach geopolitics, to teach the kind of human uh, the human decision making and consequences of warfare. She showed me how to use game-based learning in high school, and so I knew from the start that I wanted to use that in my classes. And so as I took my classes in undergrad, I would learn about different scenarios and situations where I'd be like, oh, that could be made into a game. The way economics works is you have a lot of humans all making decisions. And the way a game works is you have a lot of humans making decisions. And so if you can take the roles that people play in real life and have students role play them in a game, it's going to put them into a different perspective, a different way to think about that phenomenon and situation. It's going to be different from what these students are used to.
Sure. Oh, yay, Mrs. Doyle. We all have some of those instructors that we always remember. So, and I'm sure your students feel the same way about you. So that's exciting. Okay. So how do you make sure that it's enough rigor while doing kind of the more game-like activities or assignments?
Great question. And there is a trade-off, right? When you're doing game-based learning, you're not going to cover as many concepts. Instead of covering key ideas and words and slides and moving through it like you would a lecture, you're spending time explaining the rules of the game and giving them time to think. And so there is a balancing act to be had. You want a game to be fun, but you need to make sure that it contains learning objectives and learning outcomes. And so in my talks about, conference talks and when I talk to other professors and instructors about game-based learning, the number one thing you want to do is actually start with your learning objectives, which is what do you want to teach? And learning outcomes, which is what do you want the students to be capable of? Okay. So really, like, in the literature, and the right way to make a game is to identify those objectives and outcomes and then kind of build the game backwards from there, so that ultimately that academic rigor is at the heart of that creative process. But then you make it fun and you give them space and time to just let the gears spin. And so you're not going to cover as many concepts, though, which is kind of you can't have a game-based learning class where it's just an entire semester of games. But sprinkling the games in so that when students walk into class, they don't know if it's going to be, a crazy game day or if it's going to be a more traditional class. That variety is another component that's really going to drive engagement.
For sure. Oh, wow. That's great advice. I was going to ask you, where should instructors start if they want to try something like this? But I think you kind of answered that. So any other advice that you would give instructors? And then what have students shared? Do you get a good rate your professor on your gamification, or have you heard good feedback?
Great feat. So it's funny. The first time I ever ran a game, I was very nervous about this. So I invented a game from scratch, including like cards that I had like designed and printed. Very nervous for this first showing of this game, and the simulation game went really well. And I remember I walked out of the classroom, and I remember the door was closing behind me, and I heard a student say, "Wow, I didn't know college could be so fun." And I was like, that was a good moment, and that was my first shot too. And so I kind of instilled a lot of confidence in me that I was on the right path when it came to the gamification.
Yes. Oh, that's great. Any other advice that you would give instructors who want to do it, who want to kind of take this way of engagement?
Sure. Think about what you're studying. It's economics for me, but whatever area of a study that you're teaching, try to think about a complex phenomenon or situation where you have different entities or actors with different incentives, and then set up a simulation, set up a game environment where you have the students take on those individual roles and incentive structures. I think pretty much anywhere you can find this. It could even be like if you're teaching a biology class, like, each student could be a chemical, and like the way it wants to interact with other people, like really, like in any field, you'll be able to find a role playing situation and then just have students role play it.
Nice. And this also helps with kind of that real world relationship, like applying what they're learning to a real world situation.
Absolutely. Yeah, I just ran a simulation having students where they're a business owner, and the last kind of component of the game that they were trying to solve was how late should the restaurant stay open? Right, a very grounded example where a third of the students have worked in food service, and so they're like, these calculations make sense, and so definitely real world applications. But then again, sometimes they're going to be a little abstract. The role playing, I don't think any of our students are going to be, the nation of Kuwait anytime soon. But
Sure.
letting them step into that role does give them a fresh perspective.
Yes, and you're really meeting them where they are in the course and applying that. So speaking of meeting them where they are, you already talked about AI and encouraging some use of that, and we're all trying to navigate it. And you recently did a wonderful presentation at the Innovative Educators Summit, and it was about AI as a teaching partner. Can you share, for those of you who haven't heard that presentation, just a little more and then how you are currently using it in your teaching?
Absolutely. So AI really has a lot of applications, some that you might not think of naturally, because a lot of people think like AI, it's useful for the writing of paper, right? Um, but on the like teacher side of things, like outside of the classroom, I have found AI to be really helpful in helping with grading and workflows. So I teach students econometrics and research methods, and a big part of that is a year-long research project. And so when I have students work through this project, I have them kind of submit, it's called scaffolding. You have them send in pieces of the paper building to the final product. And for these individual pieces, I'll have requirements like, make sure that, this section is 3 paragraphs long and it needs to talk about X, Y, and Z. And, the references, when you put your references, make sure they're the correct APA formatting, et cetera, et cetera. And so when students submit it, I'll have the AI, I have a set of instructions for the AI to do a compliance check for this document. Make sure it does have the 3 paragraphs and that this section is over 750 words. Make sure that APA formatting is correct. And these are all things that I used to do personally, but they're pretty mechanical. Whether I do it or the AI does it, it doesn't really matter. But what what offloading that work to the AI does is it gives me more time to like actually address the quality and content of the paper. It when professors can use AI to take care of the mechanical part so that they can provide that higher order or that higher value feedback, addressing the students' ideas and providing their own expert opinion and perspective on those ideas. And then it gives teachers more time to be nice to the students too. I remember grading papers and I was just spending all my time like kind of looking where I can take points off because I needed to grade the paper and it needed to be done. And I have 50 of these papers and it needs to be done by next week. But now I actually have time to be like, wow, like that first paragraph you wrote was really well constructed. Before I wouldn't have had time to leave that comment. Now that AI can kind of free up, some effort and energy and time for me, I can make better connections with students and address their ideas more fully. Now, other ways you can use I like to use AI to scan anonymized grade books and kind of reduce. I'll take a grade book and kind of reduce it so that last names are removed and that sort of thing. And then I give it to the AI and say, can you point out anybody who's struggling? I teach a bunch of classes. I have a lot of students. There's a lot of data being collected. I struggle to find time to scan through that data myself, but AI can do it in a matter of, 60 seconds, maybe 2 minutes. And then I can use that saved time to send messages to those students, checking in on them, providing emotional support, providing support with the content. And I've just noticed that a lot fewer students are kind of dropping off. Every class has students that have some hardship at home, and just having a professor checking in on them is a big deal. And a lot of us are so pressed for time that we weren't able to do that consistently. And I think that AI provides that time efficiency so that we can do more for our students.
That's wonderful. And I'll just interject. There's so much research out there that the connection between the instructor and the student makes such a difference, has
Mhm.
such an influence on student outcomes. And we recently launched a messaging assistant inside of our platform at Hawks where you can message a student and it will pull from the grade book and say, student A is missed the last 3 assignments. Well, let's reach out to them directly and you can choose a tone and intent of, if motivational or very direct. And so I really like that use of AI and being able to cultivate the relationship between.
Yeah, it's fantastic that you have that tool for sure.
Yes. Thank you. Yes, we're very excited, and I'm sure that will transform even to save even more time. But it's a good start. We're all learning how to apply it and where to apply it. So I love this perspective because we're hearing a lot, and I'm sure you hear this a lot too, of just instructors who are afraid of AI, or they think it's horrible, or they think it's really just for cheating. And you mentioned students submitting the papers, and you're able to. Are you seeing any papers where students are submitting an AI written paper? And can you detect that easily?
I will say that for my students in my class, I actually encourage them to let AI help them write their paper. And me personally, can I tell if a student copy pasted? Absolutely. I don't think my undergrads understand, the idiosyncrasies of a correlation matrix. And so, when they start using words like, delve into, and it's very clearly AI written. And so for my class, I have a pretty unique policy. I say you can use AI to help you write your paper. I actually don't mind if you copy paste, which is not a normal policy for most instructors. But the way my AI policy works is if I read your paper and I see something that I know you copy pasted and you don't understand, at either at the midterm or at the final, I will, drop a piece of paper with a question on it for that student saying, in your paper, you mentioned that the correlation matrix didn't support multicollinearity claims. What did you mean by that? And if they can't answer the question, they get a 0 on the paper, or at least that part of the paper. And so most students will use AI exactly how I think AI should be used. They use AI to help them with language. They're economists. Good writing is a part of being an economist, but it's really not like our main focus. And so it's really nice to have this excellent writing tool help them do the writing. But just like in real life, if you put your name on something and then you can't stand behind it, you don't know the content that you've put your name on, that's devastating in the professional world and the academic world. And so I try to mirror that in my classroom with a devastating 0. And again, most students, they use it very responsibly. They let me know when they use AI. And actually, I have literally one student each semester who catches a 0 on an assignment. And I always have a chat with them afterwards and like, hey, this is not a hostile situation. No one likes getting a 0, but it's better that this happened with me now than your boss 2 years from now.
Mhm.
Where you lost credibility in your industry, in your sector, where reputation is a big deal, and I can't imagine a bigger hit to your reputation than claiming work that you can't stand behind. And it's always been a great learning moment for the students.
Yes, that's huge. That perspective of using it, it's going to be there, but
Hmm.
knowing how to use it. So that's a great example of using it ethically and then teaching them what it looks like when it's not ethical use.
Right.
So from your standpoint, do you think AI changes what we should be teaching or how we teach it? It sounds like it's changed a little bit your course as it's entered more mainstream.
Yes, to some degree, yes. There's a lot of core ideals and concepts across many disciplines in academia that I think are timeless. The idea of like supply and demand, that's going to continue being taught no matter what era we're in, right? Because it's just such a fundamental piece of economics. What I do think is going to change is the different ways that we uh, teach through technology. One example would be, I teach this research class and I do data visualization. And data visualization, taking a data set and making a graph out of it or a descriptive stats table, something like that. I used to, when I was teaching the students, I used to be more like procedural about it. Like, you do this step and then you do that step. And then, if you're doing a scatter plot, make sure you do this, this, this. And I'm noticing now that it's appropriate and more accurate and faster for the students for them to just ask ChatGPT how to do those steps. And so I want to show them the fundamentals, but I'm noticing the like minutia of different learning processes. I can teach it to them, and I used to teach it to them, but it's a little more accessible for them to just ask for it from this program that's always available 24/7. And so I do think like what we teach and how we teach is going to be a gradual change. And I do think that's a path that we're all still figuring.
Yes. Well, you have a really good or interesting and unique mindset about AI that so for instructors who need to embrace it, who maybe haven't yet, what would be one mindset shift that you could give to them or
Absolutely.
advice?
For sure. So there is kind of a growing movement among higher education instructors with respect to AI, and that is the difference in learning and assessment. When it comes to the learning process, we should lean into AI. That's my personal opinion. More and more studies are backing that assertion that when students use AI, they just learn faster and better. And I get it. When I was, struggling through calculus, if I had AI to just pop questions towards, I promise you my math skills would be better developed right now. Like I know that without a doubt. So the learning process, I think we need to incorporate AI at a strong level. Assessment, there's a movement of back to the basics for assessment. It used to be when a student wrote a paper, they were learning how to write, but they were also demonstrating knowledge of the content, right? You can't write a paper about something without knowing about that thing. It's not applicable anymore because AI can write those papers and the AI detectors are not reliable. Legally, a lot of colleges, you're like legally not allowed to use those detectors because they're just so unreliable. So in terms of assessment, we need to move away from papers as a tool for assessing content knowledge. We need to move back towards tests, in-class projects, and kind of coupled with that in the classroom when students are taking tests or take-home tests. Instructors need to realize that the take-home tests, it should be dead at this point, right? Anytime I hear professors talking about take-home tests, I'm like, oh, so cheating is just part of your course, basically. And not all students are going to cheat, but most of them are going to use AI and not rely on their own personal knowledge. And so ultimately, I think there needs to be a movement towards in-class assignments and exams, pencil and paper. My courses, like the lectures and stuff, it's actually a no computer classroom. Like everybody has just paper printouts of the lecture notes and they're taking notes with pencil, which is funny because I also am like really pushing for the integration of AI and we should use technology at every step. But when doing a traditional lecture or in-class discussion, yeah, it's a computer-free zone, which the students love. They're looking at screens 10 hours a day,
Yeah.
right? So they love a good old-fashioned Bronze Age classroom. And that, I mean, if you're worried about AI cheating, give them a paper exam in class, and you can be guaranteed there's no AI corruption in that assessment process. And so, yeah, come join my econometrics class. You'll see a super low tech class on Monday, and then you'll see a super high tech class on Wednesday.
What a great balance. And I think instructors feel like they have to do one or the other. But
Yeah, do them both.
yes,
Absolutely.
do them both. I love that. And yes, I think eventually our students are really going to be sick of too much screens. And it really needs to be a balance of both.
For
I
sure.
love that.
Yeah, I do sometimes I poll students, be like, raise your hand if you look at a screen 2 hours a day, 4 hours a day. And I'm noticing this uptick in students who proudly raise their hand and say, like, I don't look at screens unless it's for school. And so there's a bit of a pushback among the generation for this, over reliance on screen-based entertainment.
Yes. Wow. So switching gears just a little bit, inclusivity. This is really important to your teaching. And it sounds like you have a great way of really bringing or bridging those learning gaps. Do you think that AI helps level the playing field or does it widen it?
I think it levels it personally. AI has inherent biases. Those biases are really when AI came on the scene, there were racial and socioeconomic biases. I think a lot of those have been pretty well addressed, actually. So, I would say it levels the playing field because, and I'll draw from personal history here. I remember being in grad school, really struggling with the math to start out. we had like a math boot camp, and then there were a few math classes in the beginning of the PhD program, and they're beating me up. I was really struggling. And while I was in this grad school, I remember there being a few of my fellow students were quite rich, driving BMWs into class, and they could afford 3 hours of personal tutoring a day. And so I, on the other hand, just had to beat my head against the wall and study 3 times longer because I didn't have the money for that professional help. I was on food stamps at the time, so I really, I was as low on the socioeconomic, income level as you can get in staying alive, basically. And that impacted my educational path. And now you have AI, and Rowan University students have access to Gemini, which is a great AI program. And they now have this AI that is more knowledgeable than your average tutor, and it's free. And so I really see AI as an important step in the democratization of information. And so I think it levels the playing field. Not completely, but it's definitely a step in the right direction.
That's great. And look at you now, teaching all these students. That's a wonderful story. So AI may take some experimentation, see what works and what doesn't. So what does that look like in practice for you? You evaluate engagement, but how do you evaluate whether something is working or not in your course?
For sure. So with kind of evidence-based pedagogy, I like to begin by looking at actual studies, like peer-reviewed studies, and how professors have been integrating AI. It's better to learn from the mistakes of others. And so you do that. You look at what people in the field are doing. And then on top of that, I've always done a lot of personal experimentation with AI myself. Even when ChatGPT first came out, I like to test its capabilities by asking it a riddle. And a simple riddle, I'd say, there are 3 animals in a room. They have 10 legs. What could those animals be? Okay. And the earlier iterations of this model, early ChatGPT, the original answers were so funny. The first one would be like, well, 2 spiders and a dog, because a dog has 4 legs and spiders have 2 legs, and 4 plus 2 plus 2 equals 8. And it's like, but there's so many things wrong with that answer. Now you ask it and it gives you a clean answer, and I'd be like, do you want me to do all mammals, or whatever? And so I have found that actually just personal experimentation with when it started getting really good, I started asking about residential energy consumption stuff. That's my research interests. And it was giving me fantastic answers. And so kind of taking that into the classroom, I've noticed that it's been really helpful. I guess a metric that you could say is trackable would be the number of emails asking, how do I do the thing? How do I do this? How do I do that? Because it's hard for students to email this professor. They feel like they're bothering me with these questions. And so I know there's always been a cost associated with that email for them. And now they're just going to this kind of low cost activity, just asking ChatGPT. And so I'm noticing that students, they're getting hung up less on things, and they're able to push through difficult assignments with more efficacy than they used to. And they're learning the limitations as well. I have an assignment where I let students use AI, but I know that AI is going to get something wrong. I don't know what it is about it. They don't understand baseline specifications and econometrics. And so I'll leave that question in. And so the students that over rely on AI will put that hallucination into their assignment and lose points. And again, that's a learning moment for them, right? Where it's like, just because it's this AI doesn't mean it's right all the time. There still needs to be this checking process where you're verifying what it's saying. And so just kind of through that amalgam of metrics, it's pretty clear to me that it's a helpful tool for you.
Yes, that's great. Well, your students are very fortunate to learn from you, and now
Thank
more
you.
of your peers as well. So I'm really excited that we got to have this conversation. And I want to try something on the podcast, and I think this will help us get to know you even better. So it's called a rapid fire round of questions. Okay, so this will be fun. So I'm just going to ask you a question, and you first answer that comes to your mind.
Okay.
1 word to describe today's students.
Empowered.
Most overrated teaching trend.
Discussion boards online.
Most underrated teaching strategy.
Game-based learning.
Okay, AI, opportunity or disruption?
Both so hard, 100% both of them. Yes. I think all disruptions are opportunities and all opportunities are disruptions.
Beautiful. Yes. We can make it one or the other for sure. Okay, and your favorite classroom moment?
Favorite classroom moment? I love doing a game-based learning exercise where out of 15 students, one student has figured out the correct answer. And then collectively, you see the class conscious together, slowly but surely learning the truth, applying logic, and adopting that one student's answer as their
So rewarding.
so rewarding. Absolutely.
Awesome. So we are asking every guest the signature question on the Hawk's Edge. What does transformation in education really mean to you?
Transformation in education. I see it as a move away from the old, boring Prussian style lecture of I say things and you write them down and you remember them into this classroom environment of collaboration, critical thinking, and learning through action and new perspectives.
I really think education is we are more innovative in just the way you're even thinking about your course versus what even back in not that old, but even some time ago that it experiencing, I mean, we didn't have phones when I was in college, so quite a change.
Mhm. Quite. But I'm optimistic. I'm very optimistic about the future.
Awesome. Yes. Well, you've really instilled a lot of hope, I think, in this conversation and excitement for the future. So, Dr. Melvin, thank you for sharing how thoughtful, evidence-based approaches can help us not just keep up with change, but really lead it. And it's been fun learning from you and how you're applying all technology, but also maintaining a strong pedagogy to meet students. So thank you for being here today. Where can people learn about your work and some of the things that you're doing?
So I have been talking at a lot of conferences, actually the Innovative Educator Summit in fall. I'm probably going to do a game-based learning talk if you guys would like to have me. So
Absolutely.
I'd encourage your listeners to check out the conference and stop by my talk.
Great. Thank you. And we do have recordings from the spring on our website. So you can access those there, hawkslearning.com. And then we will have emails and information coming out about the fall as well. And I think that's just a really easy thing to attend as well because it's virtual.
Yes.
You can attend between classes, listen
Yeah.
to recordings, and really get it whenever it's convenient.
And it's a very international conference too. After my last talk, I had people all around the country emailing me and contacting me. So, you really it's a great way to share diverse perspectives.
Yes. Awesome. Fantastic. Thank you again, Dr. Melvin. We heard today the importance of student engagement. So stay tuned for our next episode. And we are going to hear students' voice on AI and all the things that they are navigating in the classroom. We know you're all very busy and the semester is close to wrapping up. But if you enjoyed today's podcast episode of The Hawk's Edge, click on that subscribe button wherever you listen to your podcasts. So until next time, keep pushing the edge of what's possible in education.
This episode was hosted, produced, and recorded by me, Valerie Ball. Editing and sound design by Liz Four. Music by Ryan Hannafin. Logo design by Caitlin Neville. Our guest today was Dr. Jesse Melvin. This podcast is presented by Hawks Learning. Be sure to follow us and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.